I've always loved the idea of staying in unique, local homes when I travel. It's part of the experience. So when I booked an Airbnb for a weekend getaway, I was excited. The place looked perfect, modern, clean, with a great location. It had everything I needed for a relaxing weekend. I'd stayed in a few Airbnbs before, and they had always been great, so I didn't think twice about this one. The pictures on the listing were amazing. The living room was bright and airy. The kitchen looked like it belonged in a cooking show, and the bedroom was cozy with a large, inviting bed. The bathroom was spotless, with those fancy soaps and a big tub. The host had excellent reviews too. Everyone said how friendly and accommodating he was. I felt like I'd scored a great deal. When I arrived, everything seemed just as it was in the photos. The house was exactly what I expected. The host had left a welcome note and a bottle of wine on the kitchen counter. It felt like a warm, inviting place. I unpacked my bags and decided to take a quick shower after the long drive. The bathroom was as nice as it looked in the pictures. I took my time, enjoying the hot water and the fancy soaps. Afterward, I wrapped myself in one of the fluffy towels and headed to the bedroom to change. I felt completely at ease, like I was in my own home. That night, I settled in with a book, the wine, and some snacks I had brought with me. The living room was comfortable, and I curled up on the couch. It was almost too quiet, but that's what I wanted, peace and quiet away from the city noise. I dozed off a bit, just relaxing and enjoying the solitude. The first night passed without any issues. I slept deeply in that big, comfortable bed. When I woke up, I felt refreshed and ready to explore the area. I spent the day wandering around the local shops, grabbing coffee and enjoying the fresh air. When I got back to the Airbnb, I was tired but happy. It was the perfect day. That evening, I decided to cook myself a nice dinner. The kitchen was fully stocked, and I was excited to use it. I put on some music and started cooking. Again, everything seemed perfect. But as I was chopping vegetables, I kept feeling something was off. It was just a feeling, like I was being watched. I shook it off as paranoia, probably just my imagination. But then, I noticed something strange. While I was looking for a frying pan in one of the lower cabinets, I saw a small hole in the wall, just above the cabinet. It was tiny, like the size of a pinhole. It seemed odd, but I didn't think much of it at first. I figured maybe it was a nail hole or something. As I continued cooking, that feeling of being watched got stronger. I started to feel uneasy, like someone was in the house with me. I checked the doors and windows, but everything was locked up tight. Still, I couldn't shake that feeling. It was gnawing at me. After dinner, I tried to relax on the couch again, but I was too unsettled. My eyes kept drifting to that tiny hole in the kitchen. I got up and took a closer look. The more I stared at it, the more it didn't seem right. It was too small and too perfectly round to be just a random hole. My mind started racing. What if it was something more? What if it was a camera? I tried to brush the thought away, but it stuck with me. I went back to the living room, but I couldn't focus on anything. My eyes scanned the room, looking for anything else out of place. Then I noticed another small hole, this time in the ceiling near the light fixture. My heart started pounding. What if there were cameras hidden in the house? I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I needed to know for sure. I grabbed my phone and started searching online for signs of hidden cameras. My search confirmed my worst fears. Those tiny holes were likely hiding cameras. The more I read, the more terrified I became. I realized I needed to get out of there, but I was also afraid to leave without knowing what was going on. I went back to the kitchen and inspected the hole more closely. With the help of my phone's flashlight and magnifier, I could see a tiny lens behind it. It was a camera. I felt sick to my stomach. Someone had been watching me the whole time. All the privacy I thought I had was an illusion. My mind raced as I thought about what to do. I didn't want to confront the host. I didn't know what kind of person he was or what he was capable of. I decided the safest thing to do was to leave immediately. I grabbed my bags, threw everything in the car, and left as quickly as I could. As I drove away, I felt a mix of anger, fear, and violation. I couldn't believe this had happened to me. I called Airbnb support and reported everything, but I felt like it wasn't enough. The thought of someone watching me in such a vulnerable state was horrifying. Airbnb assured me they would investigate. The whole drive home, I kept thinking about all the moments someone could have been watching me. When I was in the shower, when I was sleeping, when I was just living my life. It made my skin crawl. When I finally got home, I felt some relief, but the experience haunted me. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I felt violated, like my privacy had been completely stripped away. It was hard to sleep at night, knowing that someone out there might still have footage of me. Airbnb eventually contacted me and confirmed that there were indeed hidden cameras in the house. They told me the host's account was suspended, and they were working with law enforcement. But that didn't make me feel any better. The damage was already done. To this day, I'm still paranoid about being recorded. Every time I stay somewhere new, I find myself checking every nook and cranny for any signs of hidden cameras. I recently decided to take a solo trip through Denmark, hopping between different cities and staying at various Airbnbs along the way. I was excited about the adventure, looking forward to immersing myself in the local culture and enjoying the freedom of traveling alone. Everything had gone smoothly up to that point. The Airbnbs I'd stayed at were cozy and welcoming, nothing too fancy, but perfect for my needs. When I booked my stay in Copenhagen, I wasn't expecting anything luxurious. The listing had described it as a small, basic room in an older building, not the kind of place you'd want to spend too much time in, but good enough for sleeping. It was cheap, and considering that I would be out exploring most of the time, I didn't see the point in spending more on accommodation. Plus, it was conveniently located near public transport, which was a big plus for me. I arrived in Copenhagen in the late afternoon and made my way to the Airbnb. The building was just as the photos had shown. Old, a bit run down, but nothing too alarming. The neighborhood was so quiet, but I chalked that up to it being a residential area. The host had sent me instructions on how to check in, so I let myself in with the code provided. The hallway was dimly lit, and the air felt a bit musty, like the place hadn't been aired out in a while. I found my room at the end of the hall. It was small, just enough space for a bed, a tiny dresser, and a small window that looked out onto the back of the building. The walls were plain white, and the floors were kind of worn out. It was exactly what I expected, nothing more, nothing less. After dropping my bags, I decided to go out and grab some food. The sun was setting, and the streets were starting to empty out, giving the area an even more desolate feel. I found a small grocery store a few blocks away, picked up some essentials, and headed back to the room. The streets were even quieter on my way back, and I started to notice just how silent the neighborhood was. There were no sounds of cars, no people talking, just the occasional rustle of leaves or distant dog barking. Back in my room, I settled in for the night. I had a few snacks, watched some videos on my phone, and tried to relax. But something about the place made me feel uneasy. Maybe it was the silence, or the way the light from the single bulb in the room cast creepy shadows on the walls. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I was tired from the day's travel, and that once I got some sleep, I'd feel better in the morning. I turned off the light and got into bed. The mattress was old and lumpy, but I was too tired to care. I lay there in the dark, listening to the quiet, and that's when I heard it, the first sound. It was faint, just a soft creak, like the sound of a floorboard shifting under weight. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the building settling. But then I heard it again, a little louder this time, and it was followed by another sound, a soft rustling, like fabric brushing against something. I froze in bed, straining to listen. The sounds were coming from the hallway just outside my door. I was starting to freak out as I tried to rationalize what I was hearing. Maybe it was another guest, though the host hadn't mentioned there being anyone else staying there. Maybe it was the wind, though the night was still. Whatever it was getting closer, and I could feel my fear growing with each passing second. The creaking and rustling continued, moving slowly down the hallway toward my room. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I lay there, too terrified to move. The sounds were so close now, right outside my door. And then I heard it, a soft tapping, like someone lightly knocking on the door. It was so faint that I almost thought I was imagining it, but then it happened again, and I knew it was real. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to get up, open the door, and confront whatever was out there. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear, my body refusing to cooperate with my mind. The tapping stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. I waited, barely breathing, listening for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the oppressive silence of the empty hallway. A few minutes passed. I stayed in bed, too scared to move, too scared to do anything but listen. Finally, I heard a sound, the creaking of the floorboards again, this time moving away from my door, back down the hallway. The rustling followed, getting fainter and fainter until it disappeared altogether. I lay there in the dark, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was just another guest, someone who'd gotten lost and was trying to find their way around. But if that were the case, why didn't they say anything? Why didn't they knock on the door properly or call out? The whole situation felt wrong, like something out of a nightmare. Eventually, exhaustion overtook my fear, and I drifted off into a restless sleep. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was shining through the small window, and everything seemed normal again. The hallway was empty, and there was no sign that anything unusual had happened the night before. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how strange the whole situation was. The sounds, the tapping, the way it all stopped so suddenly, it didn't make sense. I decided to cut my stay short. I packed my bags, left the key on the dresser, and walked out of the building without looking back. As I made my way to the train station, I kept thinking about what had happened. I couldn't come up with a logical explanation, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't staying in an Airbnb again anytime soon. The experience had shaken me more than I cared to admit, and the thought of going through something like that again was too much to bear. Looking back on it now, I still don't know what to make of that night. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe there was a logical explanation that I missed. But the fear I felt was real, and it's something I'll never forget. So I had this trip to Iceland with my buddy, and on the last night, we needed somewhere close to the airport since our flight was super early, like 6 a.m. I found a cheap Airbnb that was just a spare room in someone's house. It seemed like a good deal, close to the airport, and we only needed it for one night, so why not? In hindsight, I wish we had just stayed at the airport. We arrived late, tired from a week of exploring, and just wanted to crash for a few hours before our flight. The host wasn't even there to greet us. Instead, it was their kid, who was probably around 10 or so. It was a little weird because the kid didn't speak much English, but whatever. We were tired and just wanted to get to bed. The house was a bit of a mess, like we were just intruding into someone's actual home. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, it's Iceland. Maybe things are just more laid back here. But it felt off. Like, you know when something just doesn't sit right with you. That's how it was. The room was small, just enough space for a bed and a tiny closet. The sheets didn't seem freshly washed, but we were exhausted, so we just ignored it. I remember lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, but I was really struggling. Maybe it was the fact that the place felt more like a lived-in home than an Airbnb, or maybe it was just being in a foreign country. Either way, I couldn't relax. My friend was already out cold, so I figured I was just overthinking things. Eventually, I started drifting off. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. It wasn't a noise or anything that woke me, more like that sudden jolt you get when you feel like something's wrong. The room was dark, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized I wasn't alone. There, standing at the foot of the bed, was the host's kid. He was just standing there, staring at us. No movement, no sound, just staring. My heart started racing. I was half asleep, confused, and honestly freaked out. I didn't know what to do. I just lay there, frozen, hoping maybe he would just go away. After a few minutes, he finally turned around and walked out of the room, not saying a word. I sat up, still trying to process what just happened. My friend was still asleep, completely unaware of the creepy kid who had just been standing over us. I didn't know if I should wake him up or just let him sleep, but there was no way I was getting back to sleep after that. I got up, quietly locked the bedroom door, and crawled back into bed. But now I was wide awake. Every little creak or noise was making me jump. I kept thinking about the kid and how he just stood there. What was he doing? I didn't have any answers, and that just made the whole thing even creepier. My mind was racing, coming up with all sorts of scenarios, none of them good. I lay there for hours, listening to every sound in the house. The wind outside, the creaking floorboards, the occasional thump from somewhere in the house, each one making my heart race all over again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the kid, it was the whole situation. The house felt wrong, like we shouldn't have been there. Morning finally came, and I was still wide awake, exhausted but too on edge to sleep. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. My friend woke up, completely oblivious to what had happened during the night. I told him about the kid, and he just shrugged it off, saying it was probably nothing. Maybe he was right, but I couldn't shake the fear that had settled in me. Maybe the kid was just curious, maybe he was sleepwalking, or maybe it was something else entirely. But the feeling I had in that house, the way the kid just stood there in the dark, staring at us, it was like something out of a horror movie. I've stayed in all kinds of places over the years, but nothing has ever creeped me out like that Airbnb in Iceland. We packed up our stuff and left as soon as we could. The host still wasn't around, and I didn't see the kid again, which honestly was a relief. We headed to the airport, and I was so glad to be out of that house, but the whole experience stuck with me. Once we were back home, I decided to message the host and let them know what happened. I didn't expect much, maybe just an apology or an explanation. But when I finally got a response, it was nothing. The host didn't seem to care at all. They just ignored what I said, didn't offer any kind of explanation, and definitely didn't apologize. That was the final straw for me. I left a bad review and swore I'd never stay in an Airbnb again.